I was around 14 the first time I picked up a book about true crime. I was at the library, my young eyes eagerly scanning the backbones of books that lined the shelves. I selected one about Elizabeth Short in Los Angeles in 1947, also known as the Black Dahlia murder. I proceeded to pore through many such books, my own curiosity killing me with the horror of it all. That's about the age I wrote my first novella about a homicide detective. So in 2012, when my boyfriend at the time warned me about gallivanting to the great up north of southern Vermont and New Hampshire, and wherever else I decided to spirit off to on a whim, I raised an eyebrow. I think there might be an active serial killer up there. He explained and, in short order, handed me a book. One of the first things he ever gave me. How romantic. We joke, but really, in my mind, there is nothing more romantic than having your woman's back. But I digress. The book was black, with red lettering on the spine. The Shadow of Death, by Philip E. Ginsberg. I read it from cover to cover in less than 48 hours, enthralled, yet mortified. Young girls, women, mothers, their lives cut tragically short. Their last minutes, no doubt, gripped with terror. These were some of Vermont and New Hampshire's coldest cases, a slew of homicides which remain unsolved. And they are centered around Claremont, New Hampshire. These cases are traditionally called the Connecticut River Valley Killings. In 2019, we moved to Westminster, Vermont, and I realized, with a start, how close we were to ground zero. Claremont. The first time I went to Claremont, I was uneasy. I relaxed a bit as time went on, but I always wondered. I wondered if the killer was still around. I wondered if that car was following us, or I got nervous when I used to smoke outside late at night. I remember seeing a group of teenage girls walking down the street and thinking, be careful. Hubs and I have been exploring together since 2012. We explore anything that piques our interest. Scenic vistas, shipwrecks, historical places. Naturally, we began to explore the Connecticut River Valley that we now lived in, visiting the towns where these women disappeared from, visiting their graves, and feeling out the areas where some were finally found, in varying states of decomposition. And going to these places where victims' cars were found abandoned, or where someone was last seen, makes you wonder, what kind of person did this? We've read virtually everything publicly available online, and listened to every podcast imaginable on local true crime and cold cases. As I browse through different websites, transcripts, and various discussion forums, I feel like I'm seeing these women only for their causes of death, for how many times they were stabbed, and how old they were, etc. Clunk, clunk, over and over. For some reason or another, there was one in particular that got me. Cathy Millican. Just a name, a single picture, and a number somewhere between 20 and 29. Occasionally, there might be another sentence or two with it. Like a postage stamp, a flat snippet of time representing everything she was, yet nothing at the same time. From the beginning, I always wondered why Cathy's case seemed to be the least covered, and why there was so little info on her. I reasoned that it had something to do with the time. In the 70s, things were still analog. Plenty of things from the 70s still haven't made it to the internet. This may be true. And I imagine if I were to reach out to family and others who might still be alive, I may be able to find so much more. I've decided to not reach out at this time. As a person who lives with PTSD, I know all too well what it's like for people to inject trauma into your life without warning. I'm here to listen, if and when they are ready. But I don't want to douse them with this, out of the blue, like cold water. For now, All the internet seems to know of Cathy was that she was murdered by stabbing on October 24th, 1978 in the Chandler Brook wetlands in New London, New Hampshire, while photographing birds. Cathy is always mentioned as somewhat of an afterthought. This has always bothered me greatly. The picture we often see is her behind a candle, looking off slightly with a soft and secret smile on her face, almost like she's sharing a private thought with herself. So I ask myself, are there no other photos? There isn't even a photo attributed to her in the shadow of death. Cathy was born on May 25th, 1951, the same day Willie Mays made his debut with the New York Giants. And Too Young by Nat King Cole was #1 on the Billboard charts. It was a Friday, hot for May but windy. She was born in Newport, New Hampshire, to Guy and Betty Alexander. She was the youngest of 4. Her family was well settled in Sunapee, New Hampshire, in a stone house on Lower Main Street. One of the neighbor's kids played with Cathy's older siblings, and they were so excited when she was brought home from the hospital as a newborn. This neighbor, also a Sunapee Select Board member, described Cathy as just delightful, a nice girl. Sunapee is a crisp and clean little town, nestled in the mountains of southern New Hampshire and surrounds Lake Sunapee, which covers 6.5 square miles, has 70 miles of coastline, and is New Hampshire's 5th largest lake. Recently, we went to Sunapee State Park Beach and watched the kids swim for a couple hours while sitting on the sandy shore. The park was opened in the 1940s, and I thought about how many summers and families had graced these shores, just like us. The air was full of laughter, and music and the lingering smells of barbecue that made my mouth water. As we sat there, I imagined what it was like back in the 60s and 70s when Cathy lived there. Did she ever walk this beach? Swim here with her siblings? Take in the lake and its magnificence? Did she take the lift to the top of Mount Sunapee for the scenic views? A May 15th, 1977 article in the New York Times was titled, "Lake Sunapee, Land of Gentle Ripples." And I agree with a giggle. The lake is massive, yet somehow gently rippling, inviting. I could see Cathy spending a lot of time there, photographing the flocks of ducks and walking barefoot at the water's edge, jumping off the diving board. Cathy's father, born and raised there, was an active-duty Marine during World War II. He returned to his hometown and his wife Betty after the war. Betty was from Massachusetts and had summered by the lake throughout her life. I imagine this is how she met Guy. They married in 1942, and Betty stayed with George's parents, Ralph and Ella, while he was away on active duty. Guy took over the family business, G.O.E. Alexander and Son, from 1952 until its closure in December 1993. Over the years, he was an active pilot, car enthusiast, volunteer fireman, and Sunapee school board member. Betty worked with Guy as the office manager until the late 1980s. She had graduated from the New York Institute of Photography and herself was a pilot. She was active in such organizations as the Historical Society of Sunapee, the Lake Sunapee Protective Association, Abbott Library, and her churches, to name a few. When I first saw one of Cathy's class photos from high school, I couldn't help but smile. She stands in the front row, in a light-colored sweater and skirt and dark knee socks, with a huge grin on her face. She looks excited, with a bit of a twinkle in her eye. You see the same glimmer in other photos. By all accounts, she came from one of the nicest families in town, and was so smart she skipped a grade. In school, she was part of the Honor Society, Glee Club, Sunapee Players, and cheerleading, where she continued to flash that smile. She seems to me to be brimming with a certain sweet yet adventurous energy. Class of 1968, the year of Sunapee's bicentennial. She went on to Connecticut College in New London, Connecticut, just north of the mouth of the Connecticut River at Long Island Sound. It is a self-proclaimed, academically rigorous liberal arts college. Photos show barefoot students, ballet, art, and photography. Photos and articles about social justice issues and philosophical ones, artistic discussions. There is a certain thread of authenticity and free-spiritedness I feel in those pages. Cathy was a member of the Pi Beta Kappa Honor Society and graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in art history. I don't exactly know when Cathy met Chuck, but I do know that in late 1971, Chuck Millican was working in Old Mystic, Connecticut, as a customer service rep for Van Zant Sales. He was gearing up to represent the U.S. in the Little America's Cup in Australia in February of 1972. Chuck had made a name for himself in the sailing world, and while I won't even pretend to be acclimated to the verbiage and lingo of such a world, I will say that he won the Class C Catamaran World Championship in 1970 and won 2 North American Sailfish Championships in 1966 and 1967. He also captained the Sunfish National Championship teams in 1970 and 1971. He estimated he sailed competitively 43 of the 52 weekends in 1970. Originally from Plymouth, Massachusetts, he picked up the sailing bug from his father, who built large traditional wooden sailboats. The family sailed frequently. Chuck eventually began to teach sailing on the Cape, while also writing a book, Sail It Flat, which to this day is considered an authority on the subject. He finally decided he didn't want to teach. He wanted to sail. So sail he did. Old Mystic is only around 10 miles from Connecticut College, so I assume this is where they met. Chuck and Cathy were married around September of 1973, and the announcement was shared in her college's alumni magazine. Cathy was about 22, and Chuck was 29. The magazine also followed up saying, Cathy Alexander Millican continues her modeling as well as her photography in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. This spring, she will do the 470 Olympic-class sailboat racing circuit with her husband, Chuck. I wonder if they eloped, ran off together excitedly, and said their vows. I actually suspect that the candle picture of Cathy could be from their wedding day. I imagine them falling madly in love and eagerly planning their future. Heading to Wisconsin for Chuck's job, doing life and sailing together. On August 23, 1974, the Santa Cruz Sentinel reported that hometown boy Chuck Millican and pretty wife Cathy walked away with top honors in the Flying Junior Nationals. They also won for the second time at Lake Champlain, Michigan. Cathy was reported to take excellent photos, particularly of sailboats. I imagine her doing this on one of those competitive sailing weekends. Boat in the sunset, boat in the waves, Chuck sailing the boat. I wonder if she had seen the ocean before this. I wonder how she felt with the sea breeze whipping her hair and the salt air sticking to her skin. Did she prefer ocean swimming to lake swimming? Did the ocean air chill her to the bone in winter? Did she ever miss the slower pace of New Hampshire? Perhaps the sea gave her the same pace. After living in Wisconsin for a time, Cathy and Chuck moved back home to Sunapee, where they built a house on a bluff on Granite Road overlooking the lake. Granite Road does not seem to exist anymore, but Granite Ridge Road does. We drove up there on our way home from the lake once, just to check it out. It did indeed overlook the lake, and I could imagine the exhilaration one would feel here, especially in the 70s, when the area was less developed and less populated. The bluff would have been a quiet, private escape. I imagine them having their morning coffee, looking out over the water, enjoying the serenity of a space removed from the bustle of town, with nothing but sky above. Chuck went to work with Cathy's father at the family business, where they had manufactured wooden rake handles since the 1800s as one of the earliest industries in the area. In the later years, they moved on to making crutches. Chuck remained an avid sailor. From December 1976 to July 1978, Cathy worked at the Kearsarge Telephone Company, where she was described by her supervisor as not only bright and efficient, but also as very creative and not wanting to do anything humdrum. She was developing her photography. She is remembered as a great nature lover and bird watcher, sitting for hours at the marsh taking photos and observing. In June of 1977, she received a certificate of ornithology from Cornell University. She was also a member of the National Audubon Society and the Audubon Society of New Hampshire. In July of 1978, she left the telephone company and went to work at Addison Publishers in Wilmot, New Hampshire, where she marketed the company's beautiful coffee table books. She was hoping to be able to use her talents here and took to the job like a fish in the water. And this is where we find Cathy on Tuesday, October 24th, 1978. She left work at about 5:30 p.m. and drove the 5-ish miles in her Volkswagen Rabbit to the Chandler Brook wetlands, where someone had told her some rare ducks were spotted. This area is absolutely beautiful and teeming with wildlife, including a multitude of flying, stinging, and biting insects. Birds call almost non-stop, and chipmunks scurry about, making a racket. There are several short trails going to the water's edge, with stone benches and a beaver's dam which had apparently been there since the 1960s. The pond stretches out with trees shooting up from its edges. The main path, called Davis Path, leads you easily through the woods, with even more paths leading to duck blinds on the water. I can imagine how glorious this place must have been on that October evening, with late autumn still casting its colors. It was brisk that day, but the light was failing, with sunset at just about 6 p.m. I wonder if she hurried, and dare I say, sped, to get there. She was probably giddy with excitement as she pulled up in the small parking area and gathered her gear. I know I would have been. I relish the opportunity to photograph nature, and have been known to blindly get the shot. Maybe the carpet of fall-colored leaves crackled underfoot as she made her way into the preserve, and she pulled her hands into her sweater to ward off evening's pending chill, and hugged herself a bit. At one point around 6 p.m., a local police officer was making his rounds. He noticed 2 cars, one being Cathy's and the other being a small, light-colored car, at the preserve. Nothing was inherently amiss, so he continued on. Chuck called her job the next morning to ask if she had arrived. I wonder if Chuck was away, and had tried reaching Cathy at home the night before. With no luck, he likely began to worry. He called her job several times that day, and after being told each time that she hadn't arrived, she was reported missing. Chief Walter Reaney had been on the New London police force since 1966. Previously, he had worked at a warehouse loading crates. In 1978, he had been the police chief of New London, New Hampshire, for 8 years. On policing, he once said, "It makes you act like you're a cold-blooded person, but you're not. You're a person who's got feelings, but you've got to block those out at the time." Did Chief Rainey steel his resolve upon realizing a missing woman's car was in his town? Did he prepare to face whatever may be out there? At 11:30 p.m. that Wednesday night, Chief Rainey, New Hampshire State Trooper Gary Quint, and the trooper's bloodhound found Cathy's body a few hundred yards off Route 11 into the preserve. Trooper Quint was 26 years old, the same age as Cathy. Did this cross his mind as a young police officer in the woods that night? Did the bloodhound's bark echo in the chilly fall night against the naked trees? He had been with the New Hampshire State Police for 3 years at that point. Merrimack County Sheriff Ronald Daniels joined them, and they spent the night combing the area where they found various possessions of Cathy's strewn about the trails, and evident signs of what had taken place. Cathy was found with her skirt pulled down and her undergarments astray. Some of her clothing had been taken off and thrown aside. She had multiple stab wounds to her neck, chest, back, abdomen, and thighs. For a more in-depth analysis of her wounds and cause of death, please read The Shadow of Death by Philip Ginsberg. Once we were visiting the preserve and hiking the trails, and one of the kids snapped a branch. It echoed more loudly than I expected it would, and I became keenly aware of the way sound traveled in this place. I imagined fall leaves, crunchy, punctuated with a scream or heavy footfalls, a crow cawing, echoing. From there on, every noise stung, and I could feel the very stain that was left here by this horrific crime, the terror and anguish of her last moments. The moon of the falling leaves is always my favorite time of year, but in this context, it is sickeningly bittersweet. It's unnerving. The very tension and energy of her last moments cling to that place, and my gut wrenches as we approach, every time. It's hard to be in there. The towns of New London and Sunapee and the surroundings were rocked by Cathy's death. There hadn't been a murder in that town since 1964, 14 years earlier. No doubt her family was too. People were shocked that something like this could happen here, in quiet, rural New Hampshire. While investigators remained tight-lipped, some speculated that a bear had gotten her. The town was abuzz with chatter, fear, sorrow, disbelief. Rumors leapt and dived for months. Security at the nearby Colby Sawyer College was increased, with students being warned to stay in at night. Immediately, an 11-person investigation unit was formed, headquartered at New London Police Department. New Hampshire State Police Lieutenant Willard Dodge headed the team, with the assistance of Chief Rennie and Sheriff Daniels. They immediately offered a reward of $1,600 for information leading to an arrest. They interviewed over 100 people and built a case file 300 pages thick. Nothing. Roadblocks were set up in the area to stop passerby at random in the hopes that someone remembered something they had seen. Nothing.
We want this person caught,
Cathy's father, Guy Alexander, said.
And so do a lot of people in New London. It's a town with a lot of retired people and college girls. This thing's got them scared.
Her case eventually went cold. In 1981, the reward was increased to $6,500. Still, nothing. 2 years later, Willard Dodge would describe the stalled investigation as one of his great disappointments in life.
We lived and breathed it for a couple months. Believe it or not, we don't know anything more now than we did then. We ran down leads, but they were all dead ends. Nothing concrete. In most cases, we have someone in mind, but just, we don't have enough to pin it on them. With this, there was nothing.
Cathy's case received renewed attention in 1986, when a task force was formed in Claremont after several homicides occurred in the region over the course of 2 to 8 years, depending how you looked at it. Cathy's case bore striking similarities to some of them. You will frequently see Cathy's name as a bullet point in this list of cold cases. Her burial place is unknown. Whenever I start to wonder why, I recall an exchange I had years ago with a friend of mine. His wife had died giving birth to their second child. Years passed, and she didn't have a headstone. When we went to visit her, we mostly guessed where she was buried. I asked him if it was the cost. He explained that the stone was already bought and paid for, but to finalize the details meant that he would have to relive the event of her death again. He wasn't prepared to do that. She died 13 years ago, and there is still no headstone. Her grave is marked by an ever-present pile of dried roses. Perhaps the same is true for Cathy. The Chandler Brook wetlands were eventually expanded and changed a bit and now bear a new name. It seems that some of the trails are overgrown, and I wonder what trail Cathy actually walked down. Did she ever take any photos that day? Was she able to breathe a sigh or two of wonder while peering through the viewfinder and snapping the shutter, fluttering with the anticipation and satisfaction of getting a great shot? Did she at least have that moment of joy and exhilaration? Today, you can see remnants of parking lot boulders, a stone wall, and what looks like a spattering of old paths, themselves getting lost in the trees. The forest eventually reclaims its floor, puts down new roots, and swallows the past. It is hard to reconcile with something so brutal happening in such a beautiful place, and to such a sweet soul as Cathy. That blood would stain the same ground where flowers grow and bees go to work. In this crisp wooded country, surrounded by forest and rolling hills, mountains and lakes. The winding ribbons of road that lead you here from Sunapee and from Newport and Claremont, that led Cathy throughout her life, and to Route 11, the last road she would ever drive. Cathy's parents lived to nearly 100, respectively, with her mother passing in 2010 and her father in 2016. In her mother's obituary photo, she is smiling, looking slightly off camera, with that same excited twinkle and beam in her cheeks like Cathy had. I find a strange, sorrowful comfort in that.